with that going, we can start focusing on the fun part, the dessert. So we're gonna make a simple dump cake. You're gonna need a 1/2 cup of sugar, a 1/2 cup of cake flour, a 1/4 cup of cocoa powder. Use alkali processed instead of Dutch processed, the flavor is better. 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder, and 1/8 a teaspoon of salt. You want to sift the dry ingredients together to blend them and to work out the lumps. While this recipe isn't a very fussy cake recipe, it's still helpful to do this step. And then you can add the wet ingredients. You're going to need 2 cracked eggs, 1/4 cup of milk, and a 1/4 cup of nice soft butter. Whip these together. It's pouring very nice and smoothly off the blenders. So let's put it in the pan. Prepared a nice 9 by 13 pan here with butter and flour. That way my cake doesn't stick to it. It's a basic baker's trick, and it works like a charm. Spread the batter out, get it into all the little corners of the pan, make it as flat and level as you can. For nice even baking and nice evenly sized layers. And here's a nice little trick to finish it off. Give it some nice shaking and a little tilting until it looks nice and even to you, and then pop it in the oven. Have the oven set at 350 degrees, and it's going to need to bake for 15 to 25 minutes. It's going to depend on your oven, but bake it until the bottom springs back when you poke at it. Now let's start working on the filling. Traditionally, Black Forest cake is filled with Kirschwasser. Sometimes the cake is even soaked in Kirschwasser, which is a German spirit that is made from distilled sour cherries. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't have a lot of use for a big bottle of Kirschwasser sitting around, so I'm making my own, if you will. I just took about a 1/2 cup of cherries and soaked them in rum for several hours, infusing the rum with the flavor of the cherries. You can use any sort of spirit that you like, whiskey, vodka, brandy, any of those would be fine, whatever you have sitting around. The next thing you want to do is put it in a pan with about 2 teaspoons of cornstarch and bring it up to a boil to thicken it up. And then this filling is going to go in between each layer of the cake and give it that classic Kirschwasser flavor that defines a traditional Black Forest cake. So you can see that the boiling, the cornstarch has thickened up the alcohol and made this into almost a jam. So this is ready for filling. The only thing that it has to do now is just cool down, because you don't want to use this in a hot form on the cake. Get it all out of there, because you're going to want every ounce of that deliciousness in the cake. The next thing to do is start working on the frosting. So you're going to need a whole stick of butter. You're going to make a nice big batch of frosting. Start with a whole stick of butter and 4 cups of powdered sugar, but only add half of it at once. That way you don't end up with a powdered sugar explosion in your face and all over your nice dress. Just beat the sugar and butter together until all the sugar has been incorporated. This is a very classic and simple buttercream frosting. Butter, sugar, a little liquid to thin it out. That's in a good state right there. Let's add the rest of the powdered sugar. So one of the reasons we're making such a big batch is because you want to put the frosting on there nice and thick. The other reason is because a little extra frosting left over is fun. So once you have the sugar and the butter all incorporated together, you'll probably see a nice mealy mix in front of you, and you might be wondering, hey, where's my frosting? So introduce a little liquid component to it, and you'll see your frosting manifest. You can use water, milk, cream, whatever you got. I'm using a little milk. I'm just gonna add it a few drops at a time and incorporate it in very slowly until I see the frosting turn into frosting. A little bit more milk. There we go. Crank it up. You can see that it's very stiff and it's holding its shape. That's perfect. The amount of liquid that you add will change depending on conditions in your kitchen. Go ahead and scrape the sides of the bowl and bring it all together. Test your consistency. It should be spreadable, but have a nice pushback. Perfect. Now with the frosting all done, it's time to check on the cake. Put down a couple hot pads there, because it's going to be hot. Just pull it out and take a look at it. Poke it in the middle, and if it feels solid and it springs back, it's done. Well, that feels nice and cool now. There's absolutely no heat left to it, so it's perfect. So I'm now going to cut out the layers. I'm going to use this cute little heart cookie cutter, and I expect to get 5 or 6 layers out of this. Now, how many layers you get out is going to depend on the size of your pan and what size of cookie cutter you're going to use. But the cookie cutter is a great way to go about this because it ensures a nice, even shape for each layer, which is important to building a beautiful work of art such as this Black Forest tower. Five nice little hearts, all ready for layering. Clean up the edges a little bit. And let's start building. So I'm going to take a nice little dollop of the cherry rum filling. I'm going to center it in there and spread it out just a little bit and leave plenty of room at the edges. And then let's add another layer. Repeat until you've used them all. And then line it up. It's helpful to look right over the top of it because that'll help you see any misaligned edges. And then it's time for the frosting. So one thing that you're going to want to have handy when you're frosting a cake is a glass of very hot water and a nice spatula. You want to draw the water right out of the tap at its hottest point for the best results. Just start smoothing on the frosting. So the most important part of the presentation of the Black Forest Tower is the top, because the sides are going to get covered in chocolate shavings. So any little holes or crumbs showing, they're not going to matter because they're going to be disguised. So focus your efforts on making the top as white and crisp and clean as you can, and you'll be in there. Just keep dipping your spatula in warm water and adding a little bit more frosting until you've achieved that pretty white appearance I just talked about. Run your spatula along the outside edges to form a nice, clean, crisp heart shape. And when you're satisfied with your efforts, you're good to proceed to the next step. There we go. Now take some nice chocolate shavings. I have a very rich, bittersweet chocolate here. Sort of press it onto that frosting. This particular chocolate that I chose is an 80% cacao. So there's almost no sweetness to it. It's a perfect offset to the sweetness of the frosting. Well, I'm satisfied with that. That looks fantastic. I'm just going to brush off these extra little chocolate shavings that gathered on the bottom of the plate. Use those for something else, another baking project in the future. And to clean up the presentation, I'm going to wipe the rim with a little damp cloth. Make it all crisp and shiny and bright. Don't worry about getting too close to the cake. You don't want to destroy your hard work on those chocolate shavings. Okay, all nice and cleaned up. We're ready to go for the next step. So load a bit of your frosting into a piping bag if you like for a little extra dramatic effect. And pipe on some nice little stars. And then garnish with some cherries. Now here's a little trick to get the pits out of the cherries, but make them still look whole. So pull the stem out, and you just kind of peel them open with your fingers, but leave them hinged at the bottom. And then pull out the pit, put the cherry back together, and put it on top of the frosting. Then you are done.